Tonight, the Senate impeachment trial enters its next phase.
Is there any way for the Senate to render a fully informed verdict in this case without hearing the testimony?
As Republican leadership appears to be losing the fight to keep witnesses from being called to testify. The latest from Capitol Hill. And a legislative victory for the Trump administration.
The USMCA is the largest, fairest, most balanced, and modern trade agreement ever achieved.
With the backdrop of impeachment in the Senate, the president signs the bipartisan trade deal with Canada and Mexico. Plus,
we're not alone in this. There are more people than we think.
Why some say the pro-life movement is growing on college campuses. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
Question and answer hour in the Senate impeachment trial. Welcome to Faith Nation, and thanks for joining us. I'm John Jessup.
And I'm Jenna Bratter. Today, senators submitting written questions to the House managers and the president's defense.
And those questions revealing deep divisions between the two sides. Abigail Robertson is following the back and forth and joins us from Capitol Hill with the latest. Abigail?
Well, that's right, John. And just between you and I and all of our viewers, it's a little hard to pull a headline out of what we've seen today. So far, we've seen a lot of softball questions from the senators, with Democrats submitting most of their questions to the prosecution and Republicans submitting most of their questions to the defense. And each side is kind of teeing up the defense and prosecution to repeat a lot of the talking points that we've already heard these past few weeks. And senators still, for the most part, have to remain silent, and they aren't allowed to talk amongst themselves. And they submit these questions by writing them down on a piece of paper, and then we see Chief Justice John Roberts read them aloud on the Senate floor, and then either the defense or prosecution gets a chance to respond.
And Republicans got the first question, Abigail. Talk about that and the questioning that we are seeing here.
Yeah, that's right, Jenna. Well, the first question of the day went to the three musketeers, and that's Senators Lisa Murkowski, Mitt Romney, and Susan Collins. Now, these are the three Republicans that Democrats believe could side with them in calling for documents and more witnesses in the Senate trial. And they submitted a question together to the White House defense team around motives that Chief Justice John Roberts then read aloud, and the White House got a chance to respond. Take a look.
How should the Senate consider more than one motive in its assessment of Article 1?
If there were a motive that was a public interest but also some personal interest, we think it follows even more clearly that that cannot possibly be the basis for an impeachable offense.
Now, one of the most important questions hanging over this whole impeachment trial in general is whether it matters if there was a quid pro quo. And that's the question that Texas Republican Ted Cruz asked the president's defense team today, which Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz, who's a member of the White House counsel, jumped at the chance to answer.
Quid pro quo. If you don't do it, you don't get the money. If you do it, you get the money. There's no one in this chamber that would regard that as in any way unlawful. The only thing that would make a quid pro quo unlawful is if the quo were in some way illegal.
And it still remains to be seen if this phase of the trial is really going to move the needle or change anyone's mind at this point.
Abby, speaking of big questions, another major outstanding question, and the one really looming over today's back and forth, is whether the Senate will actually call for more witnesses. What are you hearing? Is that going to happen?
That's right, John. And the vote on witnesses, we really don't know yet, but that vote is expected to go down Friday. But it won't even ensure if witnesses will be called forth. Now, here's an interesting scenario to lay out. Now, the senators could vote to call witnesses, and then they could have separate votes for each individual witness. So that could mean that we could see enough Republicans vote with Democrats to bring forth witnesses, but then we could see a differentiation when each individual person is proposed that could fail. So this, in summary, this could take a while. And in fact, we still have 8 hours left tomorrow for senators to pose more questions through the Chief Justice. And Democrats are looking, they want to see eyewitnesses, people who were in the room, people like Ambassador John Bolton. And Republicans are still floating the idea of calling Joe or Hunter Biden. And that's something Democrat Minority Leader Chuck Schumer hit back on today.
It's a terrible argument for the president. Here, the House managers have argued that the president was willing to risk our national security and risk the sanctity of our elections to go after Joe Biden and his son. Now they're saying we even want to risk the solemnity of a trial in the Senate on impeachment to go after Hunter Biden and his son. It's irrelevant, it's a distraction, it's running away from the truth, and it's up to the Republicans, and solely the Republicans, to do it. We're not for it.
Now, the Democrat push to call John Bolton is putting renewed pressure on Republicans because John Bolton is coming out with a book, and it could have a lot of details that many senators are eager to hear and could tip the scale.
Abigail Robertson reporting on Capitol Hill. Thanks, Abby. And the public is weighing in. A majority of American voters do want to hear from witnesses at the impeachment trial. According to a new Quinnipiac University poll, 75% say witnesses should be allowed to testify. The breakdown, according to party, 95% of Democrats want witnesses, 75% of independents agree, while nearly half of Republicans say they want to see witness testimony. That same poll finds a majority. 53% of voters say they don't believe the president is telling the truth about the situation with Ukraine.
To the president's Middle East peace plan, mixed reaction in the region tonight. Backed by Israeli leadership and rejected by the Palestinians, people there are divided.
President Trump has very good intentions, and he has some understanding of the situation in the Middle East, and especially in Israel and Judea and Samaria. But I think that the solution is totally not realistic.
And other Middle East powers are also weighing in. Turkey and Iran have issued some of the strongest objections. Qatar welcomes the effort, but is cautioning the need for Palestinian support. And Saudi Arabia says it appreciates the effort, but is encouraging direct talks between Israel and the Palestinians.
Now let's bring in Chief Political Analyst David Brody for more. David, the administration has long been teasing this newly released peace plan. Today, you got a chance to talk to someone who's intimately familiar with the proposal because he worked on it, and that's U.S. Ambassador to Israel, David Friedman.
That's right. He's been doing the Jerusalem to D.C. shuffle and shuttle commute. Yeah. I know a little bit about that, by the way. Yeah, no, and I had a chance to speak to him today. You know, there's so much more that we discussed. There's tons of details specifically, and I have to tell you, there's an input list. There's been a lot of people that have actually inputted into this peace plan, but David Friedman specifically is at the top of that list. And, you know, he grew up as an Orthodox Jew, and I have a Jewish blood in me as well, and so that's where we began our discussion. Growing up Jewish, the Seder table, why is this night different from all other nights? The peace plan, why is this peace plan different from all other peace plans? This has been tried before. Sure. Why could this potentially be successful?
Well, if you go back in time at all the failed peace plans, the roadmaps, the protocols, Camp David, Wye River, Oslo, I would defy you to wade through that massive material and actually find out who's getting what. What are people delivering? What are they receiving? What this plan does is it presents a hard offer to the Palestinians, the first they've ever received, the first time Israel's ever identified with specificity what are the territorial dimensions within which they're willing to live side by side with the Palestinian state. What are the terms under which they will accept the Palestinian state? What are the security protocols under which they will live next to a Palestinian state? So it's a really hard offer for the Palestinians. And on top of that, Palestinians have 4 years to claim the prize. 4 tough years. They have to, in that period, stop the malign activity. Hamas has to disarm. Islamic Jihad has to disarm. They have to stop paying terrorists. They have to stop inciting hate. They have to develop a system of laws with the rule of law, freedom of press, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. So there's a pathway to Palestinian statehood, but it holds the Palestinians accountable. If they want to join the community of nations, they have to do so on terms that are not threatening to Israel nor the United States.
How is this going to be possible with a Palestinian leadership that just doesn't show up at the negotiating table? I mean, look, they've been given, or in this proposal, $50 billion in investment. East Jerusalem is the capital, two-state solution. How do they even get there at this point? They don't trust Trump. They don't trust folks coming from this administration.
Well, look, this was designed to, if not regain or obtain the trust of the leadership, at least to obtain the interest of the Palestinian people. Look, the leadership has failed the Palestinian people for generations. They've become pawns in larger conflicts, and the leadership has shown itself to be very adept at misdirecting the resources of the territory to their own pockets. And so the fact that they're not jumping for joy right now is not a great surprise to us, because they thrive. Their business plan is to continue to foment this hatred. But the people within the territories, they are suffering.
As for evangelicals traveling to Israel, Friedman says there's good news in this proposed peace plan. Israel would have sovereignty over many historical biblical sites, which right now are hard to get to.
Israel has not yet obtained sovereignty over those territories. If they do, and our plan contemplates that Israel will, you're talking about opening up the Bible, bringing it back to life in ways that I think your listeners could not even have imagined. I mean, imagine just ease of travel under Israeli civilian autonomy, Hebron, Beit El, Shiloh. I mean, it's an opportunity for biblical tourism that I think will grow and flourish in profound ways.
On this president, he's done a boatload for Israel, obviously. You surprised at all by that, or maybe pleasantly surprised? And that's the first part. The second part is the Israeli transportation minister, I think, just recently said he's God's messenger in the White House. I mean, is Trump kind of heaven sent for you guys?
Well, look, when it comes to events that transpire, whether it's with regard to Israel or anything else, I mean, I'm a believer. I believe that God runs the world. So that would apply to the president. It would apply to you, me, and the cameraman. So that's not news to me.
And just to clarify, you would say it's not news to you. You're talking about kind of a, God puts people in certain places for certain times, kind of for such a time as this?
I think God puts people in places for certain times, at all times.
And Trump is Exhibit A of this.
He sure is.
There's so much more that we discussed, the controversy over settlements and what Jerusalem would also look like under the plan. We're going to put more of the interview up on CBNnews.com. Real interesting guy. He was running pretty busy today.
Yeah, this is the first time that you had met him. Really interesting. Great interview, David. What's been the reaction from evangelical Christians?
Very positive, relatively positive. I mean, I think there's a segment of evangelicals who would like the whole enchilada. And what I mean by the enchilada is in the book of Joel, it talks about if you start dividing the land in Israel, Judea and Samaria. Well, that's not what God commands in the book of Joel. And I think that's some of the concern. And I actually asked David Friedman about that, and we get into some of the Old Testament scripture verses there, because he's an Orthodox Jew and he agrees with that. But he says, look, at some point we have to choose security here, and so that's part of it.
And that's why you also see some pushback in Israel from some of the ultra-Orthodox who are typically aligned with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Yeah, they're wondering. They're not calling it a sellout, but they have a very big concern about a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria. But the key point here is that Israel will have sovereignty over all of that territory, not to mention the facts, or specifically the settlement areas, which are very, very important. So the Palestinians really don't get much land here. And remember, there's a 4-year window here, and I think that's really important. So the Palestinians have 4 years to come to the table, take a bite of the loaf, or if the deal is up, it's pulled from the table.
All right, Chief Political Analyst David Brody, thank you for being with us.
Guys.
And thank you for the interview.
You bet.
Well, forget the coronavirus. Coming up, why the flu is worrying more doctors here in the United States.
To have sex before you marry is a bad idea.
Don't tell me there's no such thing as gun violence.
That just depends on your definition of when life begins. Watch Dan and Dale tackle trending topics that test your faith on the next Faithwire, Monday night at 9:30. The Global Lane takes you around the world, providing facts over fiction.
What might rising trade and geopolitical tensions mean for you on the home front?
With over 45 years of experience, award-winning journalist Gary Lane brings you the truth from a global angle.
What about the issue of immigration?
World news analysis you won't see anywhere else.
And it's all right here on the Global Lane.
Watch The Global Lane, Thursday night at 9:30.
A major legislative win for the White House today. President Trump signing a new trade deal with Mexico and Canada. The USMCA replacing NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us with what this means for you at home. Ben?
Well, Jenna, this is no doubt a big victory for the president. It's being hailed a win for the American worker and is even projected to create 600,000 jobs.
I keep my promises, and I'm fighting for the American worker.
Surrounded by American workers on the White House South Lawn, President Trump signed the largest trade deal in American history.
NAFTA ends today, and a new era of jobs and growth begins under the USMCA.
It replaces the 25-year-old trade agreement with provisions aimed to strengthen the manufacturing industry, improve labor standard enforcement, and increase market access for American dairy farmers.
This is something we really put our heart into. It's probably the #1 reason that I decided to lead this crazy life that I'm leading right now, as opposed to that beautiful, simple life of luxury that I led before this happened. But I love doing it.
This is quite a victory. And, you know, I was one who was skeptical, as you know, that Trump could pull this off. I thought it was a risky strategy.
But Moore says that strategy paid off and calls it Trump's biggest bipartisan victory since taking office, adding the deal comes on the heels of Trump signing the Phase 1 trade agreement with China.
I guess what this means is Trump is on a roll here. And they just announced last week or a few days ago that they're now looking at really trying to finalize a trade deal with Britain. So Trump is really redesigning how we do trade deals.
Now, President Trump will tour a manufacturing facility in Michigan on Thursday. It's there he'll see firsthand the impact the USMCA will have. Mexico has already ratified the agreement, and Canada is expected to follow suit in the next few days, coming days, that is. John, Jenna?
Ben Kennedy at the White House, thank you. And we'll be right back.
On the home front.
Thanks for joining us for CBN's On the Home Front, where we highlight what the men and women of America's military do to defend our country. CBN honors the men and women in our military with an initiative called Helping the Home Front. It partners with churches across the country to meet the needs of their military families, from repairing homes to wiping out medical bills for wounded veterans.
On the home front, Tuesday morning at 10:30.
If you want to be an attorney with a passion for serving people and for excellence, Regent University needs to be high on your list.
Regent's award-winning law school doesn't just create lawyers. We create leaders, judges, prosecutors and defense lawyers, civil litigators, and leaders in government.
My focus has been trying to really make sure we have the future leaders we need for the bench and the bar and for society generally.
You'll learn from highly credentialed leaders who are current and former judges, distinguished scholars, and ACLJ counsel.
I'm so glad I chose Regent. The relationships here have been amazing. The faculty have been amazing. Not everybody's called to the same thing when they leave law school, but they're called by a God who has a purpose for their lives, and He is going to use that education to make a difference in the world.
Regent will prepare you to be a purpose-driven, practice-ready lawyer. To start your rewarding law career, complete the online application, submit your transcripts, and take the law school admissions test by July. Apply today.
And welcome back. Lawmakers in Virginia are officially advancing legislation aimed at easing restrictions on abortion access. The State House passed a measure Tuesday that would reverse previously passed legislation from 2012. It includes getting rid of mandatory waiting periods before having an abortion, ultrasound requirements, and office requirements for doctors performing the procedure. The Senate is expected to pass the measure by the end of the day.
And to coronavirus, it continues to dominate headlines worldwide. Here at home, the flu, though, is hitting hard. The CDC reporting so far this season, 15 million people have gotten sick with the flu, and more than 8,000 have died. The CDC warns flu levels remain high.
And joining us now to dive a little bit deeper into those numbers, CBN medical correspondent Lori Johnson. Lori, I guess the first question to ask, maybe the one on most people's minds if they haven't already gotten it, is it too late into the season to get the flu vaccine?
No, it's not too late to get the vaccine. The flu season lasts through April, and although it is a 2-week incubation period, so for the first 2 weeks after you get the shot, you could still get the flu. Doctors say it's worthwhile, and even though you can still get the flu while you have gotten the vaccine, it will also make the flu a little bit less virulent, a little less deadly and harsh, and won't last as long.
Lori, what are some of the best ways to prevent getting the flu besides that vaccine?
Well, really, we've seen this with the coronavirus. The best way to stop the spread of the flu is for people who are sick not to be around people who are well. And we see this a lot with people coming to work who are sick, people sending their children to school when they are obviously sick. And this is really a life or death situation because, you could infect somebody at work and they could in turn infect someone at home, like a child or an adult who is at risk of dying from the flu. 75% of the people who die from the flu are over age 65, and many of the people who are young are also at very high risk. You talked about the death rate earlier. 56 of those people who have died from the flu this season are children.
Lori, can we talk a little bit about the symptoms and at what point should someone go to see the doctor?
Unfortunately, the flu comes on very suddenly, so time is of the essence. So again, the people who are at most risk of dying from the flu are the very young and the very old. So parents, here, you need to take your child to the emergency room if they start breathing very rapidly, if you can see their ribs when they're breathing, if their skin looks a little bit blue or their lips are blue, if they have muscle pain. For children, that means they will stop walking. If they're dehydrated, if they haven't gone to the bathroom or had a wet diaper in 8 hours, or if they cry and no tears are coming out of their eyes. Also, if they have a cough or a fever that gets better but then gets worse. And similar situations for older people over age 65. If they have difficulty breathing or chest pains, that could be pneumonia. Also, if they're dizzy or confused or difficult to rouse, if they also have severe muscle pain, and again, cough or fever that gets a little bit better or then gets worse, take them to the ER.
When it comes to the coronavirus, Lori, people are obviously worried, but is there a vaccine in the works for that one?
There is, actually, and we just heard today that it might actually be here sooner than expected. They're expecting phase 1 trials to begin as early as 3 months from now, which means they could start giving it to people within the next year. Talking about the death rate for the coronavirus, everybody is afraid, and for good reason. But whenever you talk about a deadly virus, you have to think to yourself, How deadly is it? Right now, the death rate for the coronavirus is 2%. That means 98% of the people who get it survive. They make it through. And again, just like with the flu, it's the older people who already have existing health conditions. With the flu this year in the United States, there's a 5% death rate, meaning 95% of the people survive the flu, but then there is still that 5% who won't.
No.
Yeah, that percentage breakdown helps put it all in perspective.
Right.
Lori Johnson, as always, great information. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Well, you know the saying, the grass is always greener. That's especially true when it comes to this year's Super Bowl. That story next.
If you want to be an attorney with a passion for serving people and for excellence, Regent University needs to be high on your list.
Regent's award-winning law school doesn't just create lawyers. We create leaders, judges, prosecutors and defense lawyers, civil litigators, and leaders in government. Ready to become a purpose-driven, practice-ready lawyer? To start your rewarding career, complete the online application, submit your transcripts, and take the law school admissions test by July.
Nutrition, exercise, essential oils, weight loss, and more. It's Healthy Living with Lori Johnson.
Talk about what's in this.
Join CBN health reporter Lori Johnson to get the latest information from today's top health experts.
This is fantastic.
Find out what you need to know to live a healthier life. Watch Healthy Living, Tuesday night at 9:30.
Woohoo! Hi, Superbook fans. Here's something else you'll love. It's the new Superbook Bible app. It's packed with games, activities, and Superbook episodes that you can watch for free. Oh no! There's trivia, a fun daily devotional, and answers to your Bible questions. Plus, an easy-to-understand Bible the whole family will enjoy. You can even create your own Superbook character. Ta-da! Whoa!
Millsburg Falls man, come.
Sorry, pardon me. Sorry, excuse me. Ouch!
Are you getting this?
Earn super points to win daily prizes too, and so much more. Time to get back to my adventures. See you soon. It's the new Superbook Bible app. Free downloads on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon.
Young people, millennials, are flocking to church.
It's not an exaggeration to say that we love to meet them and that we love to know their stories.
Well, Jenna, you know what's happening in 4 days.
I don't know. What's that?
The Super Bowl.
Oh, right, the Super Bowl.
And final preparations are underway for the big game Sunday between the San Francisco 49ers and the Kansas City Chiefs.
And while the game is being played in Miami, I did know that, the field itself had to make a cross-country trip for the big game. It all started on a sod farm in California. The grass being used began growing a whole 2 years ago. This Sunday's game will be the first time anyone has played on it. Until then, its moisture levels are being consistently monitored, and it's getting a healthy dose of artificial sunlight.
Who'd have thunk it?
Who'd have thunk it?
Well, that's going to do it for tonight's Faith Nation.
Have a great evening.